Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Aliana Kernodle. The Trump administration's Department of Education announced last week that it is working to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion from its website and workforce. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, there are several pieces they are addressing. What steps have they taken so far?
Yeah, so one of the first actions that the Department of Education said that it was going to start scrubbing diversity, equity, and inclusion from the website, and specifically putting staff who lead DEI initiatives on administrative leave and nix over 200 web pages with DEI resource that, quote, promote or endorse harmful ideological programs. So that was one of the things they brought up is that this is in correlation with President Donald Trump's, quote, ongoing commitment to end illegal discrimination and wasteful spending across the federal government. So this is a big sea change from the Biden administration's focus on equity. And I think we wrote about that, is that a lot of these different things that the Biden administration was doing was kind of in accordance with an executive order to have like these, I think they're called equity action plans. So yeah, EAPs. So these federal agencies would have to detail the ways that they were furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have these kind of, I think, annual reports even saying this is what we're doing. And so the Trump administration, as you might imagine, is going completely the other way and is basically trying to take everything out of these kinds of out of the federal agencies. So the public-facing content, for example, these different resources that the Department of Education put out that were equity-focused, they're being scrubbed from the website. And so it is, again, over 200 web pages. The Department of Education said, quote, Americans deserve a government committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect and to expending precious taxpayer resources only on making America great. And it also said that they canceled $2.6 million in contracts for DEI training and services, and that it did kill the Department of Education's equity action plan, and that there might be more changes to come. So essentially, we're going to take these remnants from the Biden administration and just try to get rid of anything that has to do with sort of that equity focus, and specifically that idea that people need maybe targeted help. So that's kind of the idea of equity, is that you give preferential treatment to some groups who need it the most. And so that's the idea that the Biden administration was putting forward, was that you would have some groups of people, some demographics that would get targeted funds from these programs or receive, more equitable resources. For example, for school districts would be if you had a school district with lower test scores or more poverty, then you would give them a higher percentage of, federal resources, for example. So the Trump administration is trying to walk a lot of those back because it calls them illegal and immoral discrimination programs. So it's a very big sea change from the Biden administration.
And another kind of focus or steps that were taken in the Biden administration related to equity was book removals. Notably, they went after some schools for this. Is the new administration addressing that?
Yeah, so that was another big action that the Trump administration took last week, and they called the Biden administration's efforts to try to weigh in on some of these complaints about books or in hostile environments. They call them, quote, hoax complaints. So that's something that it's kind of a very large term in terms of what it connotes. But essentially, they said that the Biden administration was wrongly using its authority as a federal agency to go after these school districts that were removing books. And so I reported on in 2023 was how the Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education was going after school districts because of complaints. So, for example, Forsyth County Public Schools in Georgia, it had a complaint filed to the Federal Office of Civil Rights, and the Fed stepped in and they said, you are creating a hostile environment, and so you have to they had to come up with an agreement with the school district where they would, post different kinds of things, and basically come to a legal resolution, essentially saying that they were going to take this action to ameliorate the situation. And the Trump administration has said that that is not what the Office of Civil Rights should be doing, and that this is a quote, a question of parental and community judgment, not civil rights. So the Office of Civil Rights has, quote, no role in these matters. And so they said that, parents, school districts, communities, small towns, they should be able to say, here's what we want in our libraries, and that the Office of Civil Rights shouldn't have anything to do with it. And so, again, quote, the complaints allege that local school districts' removal of age-inappropriate, sexually explicit, or obscene materials from their school libraries created a hostile environment for students. But then the Department of Education called that, quote, a meritless claim premised upon a dubious legal theory. So that essentially they're rescinding all the department guidance issued under that theory that violates civil rights laws, and that they're going to no longer have a book ban coordinator. I think the terminology for the Biden administration was like the book ban czar, and so that they're no longer gonna go in and investigate local school districts and how they're creating some of these guide rails, for example, or saying like, hey, we don't want to have this book on our shelves. The Office of Civil Rights is not going to do that. So again, this is that broader movement away from the focus of the Biden administration, where that was a very big deal. And we reported that. I think we were one of the only outlets to report how the director of the Office of Civil Rights said that she was very eager to pull federal funding from schools that created a hostile environment based on these protected characteristics that they were understanding them to be. So they were using this legal theory to go after schools and try to tell them you cannot remove any books. And that there was a report that the Office of Civil Rights released that kind of walked through their decision making. And that was referenced with the Trump administration's actions on this to dismiss those complaints. So specifically, the actions that they're taking are dismissing these 17 complaints. So there's 11 complaints that had been filed, and then 6 were pending investigation. So a total of 17 complaints about school districts removing these books and, quote, creating that hostile environment. So they said that doesn't compute. We're not going to do that. So again, a huge sea change in terms of the power of the federal government and what its focus is on from administration to administration.
Well, Brennan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.